Hi guys, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for tuning in to another Road Pilgrim review. And today we are actually hiding in a multi-story car park because it's just so damn hot outside. And normally we do this kind of car reviews outside, right? But generally it gets a little bit too hot, the sun is a bit too harsh. We try to hide out inside a little bit so that we are a little bit more comfortable and we can share a little bit more information with you. So for today's review, we actually have the new Lexus RX350h, which is already in its 5th generation. I think some of you might remember the car from generations ago where it was still very similar to the Toyota Harrier. But the car that you see today, which is the car behind me, very pretty car, is quite different from the Harrier of old and from the Lexus RX of old. So today what we're going to do is that we are going to take the car for a drive. I'm going to show you some of the bits and pieces of inside and outside of the car, and share with you what are some of the cool things, what are some of the things we don't like so much, and generally share with you our thoughts about how Lexus RX is as a car to buy today. Alright, so let's go check it out. Okay guys, so the very first thing I want to talk about the RX is the fact that this car, although it looks humongous, is actually the exact same size as the old car. So it takes up the same footprint as the old car in terms of the total length. But what you need to know is that this car actually runs on a brand new platform. It's a different platform from the old car, and because it's a different platform, the wheelbase is actually slightly longer, the car is actually slightly wider inside, and I think what that translates to is probably a little bit more cabin space. The other thing that you want to know about this car as well is that it is now only a strict 5-seater, which means that you can no longer get a 7-seater option of this car, at least not in Singapore. So there have been some people that have said online that the new RX looks pretty ugly, but I probably will disagree with that sentiment because I think the Lexus RX in its current generation, I think it looks pretty good. Some people think that the front looks a bit weird with the absence of a very demarcated grille. So previously the spindle grille, right, and Lexus is known for the spindle grille, what you would see is probably like a chrome piece around where it clearly shows you where the spindle grille is. But instead now, in this current generation, the spindle grille has sort of been integrated into the bodywork. So it's actually almost like a spindle body. You can see the lines are very nicely integrated. And I think this is actually a pretty cool touch. I mean, you don't see many automakers doing this. And I think it does give the car a more futuristic look. And it's something that helps to kind of break the notion that the RX is a car that is generally driven by, you know, slightly older people, not a very young person's car, right? But I think in its current shape and its current form, this could be quite appealing to somebody, say, in their mid-30s or early 40s. I don't know. What do you think? Leave it in the comments. Tell me what you think about the car. But I generally quite like it. I think it looks sharp. The front end looks very neat, very futuristic. Coming round the back, this C-pillar that you see here looks actually quite similar to the old car, I think. But the rear end has also been kind of straightened up a little bit. You still get that Lexus word across the front here. Sorry, across the back, not the front. What am I saying? And that's how the car looks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually jump into the car and look around the car, because I actually haven't really played with this as well. So inside the car you get an interior that is very consistent with the current crop of Lexus cars. I think the interior feels very similar to what you might find on the NX as well. If you have ever been in a Lexus NX, you will find this same 14-inch touchscreen here. Gear selectors are also quite similar. Over here, right? Pretty cool. Park is just a button here. In terms of drive modes, this is a hybrid car, so you do get quite a lot of other nitty-gritty things as well. So one of the main things is that you've got EV mode, which will allow you to drive the car purely on electric power alone. But from personal experience, most of the time, the usage of this EV mode is probably quite limited. The car is quite sensitive, or rather quite picky about when it allows EV mode only. So that is probably something that you will only get to play with from time to time. Generally around the car, when you get in, immediately you are greeted with a luxurious amount of leather. And this is like sort of like an Alcantara finish, right? So it's very premium, very nice, very in line with what you would expect from a Lexus. And when you sit down as well, driving positions are nice. I'm nicely elevated off. Vantage point is quite good. I actually like the fact that these steering wheels have sort of had this, I'm not sure if you can see properly, but they have a wooden inlay here. But it's not done in the traditional uncle old man way where it's like that gloss, shiny wooden finish. This one is done in a sort of a matte, sort of an ash charred kind of wood finish. And that's actually pretty modern and pretty cool. I also like the fact that the steering wheel is on the thinner side. It feels like it doesn't pretend to be a sports car, because it really isn't. And the girth of the steering wheel being thin does kind of help with maneuverability as well. It's very easy to use the steering wheel, and I think I'll show you how the car is to drive later on as well. Inside this car, what you do get is ventilated seats, which is such a lifesaver. I need to find it though. My ventilated seats are already on, but I can't exactly, I'll need to figure out where they go. Climate. Right, so ventilated seats are right here, you can see. So you've got 3 settings or 3 modes for ventilated seats and 3 modes for heated seats. Naturally in Singapore, I don't think you'll ever use the heated seats lah, unless you're like caught in the rain and you're like shivering or something. But generally speaking, ventilator seats are one of my favorite features on cars, especially cars in Singapore, because the weather can get so hot, and sometimes when you jump into a car that's hot, right, the aircon can only do so much. All the heat is just trapped between you and the seat, and you just need a ventilated seat to sort of alleviate some of that. Zeroing in on these knobs, they are actually one of the nicest knobs I've seen on a car. They look pretty simple, and they've got a nice little purple and blue graphic that sort of exists within the circle. But they're really nice to touch, really nice to turn. They're coated with sort of like black plastic, but inside feels like it's aluminum, so it's kind of nice. I like it. Not a make or break feature of the car, but nonetheless something that could be interesting to you. If you've got any other interior features of the car that you want to take a look at, please let me know. If I've missed it out, because there's just so many, right? I'll definitely get back to it. What you see here now is the driver's display, instrument driver's display, and this is fully digital. Very neat as well. I like that it shows you the RPM and the speedo all in one, which is very good in terms of keeping your attention. It doesn't distract you from too many things. Layout is also pretty simple. In the RX350h, you also do get a heads-up display, which you can see here. So once again, not a big make or break feature, but if you are buying a luxury car in this segment, I think these are just some of the nicer things to have that are probably appropriate for a car in this price point. So right now, I'm going to jump into the back and see how that feels like. Okay, so this is the rear bench of the RX350h, and as you can see, there is quite a considerable amount of room. So with this car, like I mentioned earlier in the video, you won't get a 7-seater version anymore, and I think that's probably led Lexus to kind of stretch the legroom a little bit. So now you have quite a huge amount of legroom. I mean, this chair, or the driver's chair, is actually in my regular driving position, and I am 175 meters tall, so pretty average sized human being. And this is the amount of legroom that I have. It's actually quite a significant amount. Let me see, try to get you a better view. Look, it's just a huge amount of space. The rear bench also features a floor that is, I mean, there is a tiny hump here, but it is almost flat. So if you're thinking of carrying 3 people at the back of this thing, I think it is actually quite viable. So let me just close the door here. Okay. So in line with being a luxury SUV, you've got nice little things like these built-in blinds. They aren't automatic, but that's fine because usually these sort of blinds, right, you just kind of leave them up. For me as well, in the back of my own car, I generally try to just leave my own blinds up, just for the kids, you know. You don't want the sun to get in their eyes. Another nice touch I feel, usually at the back of these type of cars, I mean rear air cons in general, they aren't really decorated, they are just plain black plastic, but in the RX, Lexus have actually bothered to add a piece of chrome here. It's matte chrome, so once again very modern, none of that shiny material. So this is actually a nice touch because the whole car does look a little bit better from the back because of this. The last thing that I find quite interesting about the RX, and actually in modern Lexus cars as well, not just the RX, but if you haven't already seen this, the car doors now open via the touch of a button, so there is no lever like traditional car doors, you know. We don't do that anymore, so that's pretty cool. One thing I wish the RX did have though, and for a car at this price point, I think they could have afforded to put it in, which is actually auto close doors or soft closing, because I have that in my 2012 5 Series already, and it's 2023 now, and I think cars that cost upwards of $400,000 should probably have it. But that's not a problem specific to Lexus. I think quite a number of new cars today don't have it as well. And I think, you know, on the surface it sounds like it's just about luxury, but it's really not, because when you are trying to load a sleeping baby into the car and you don't want to slam the car door, soft closed doors are a lifesaver. And I think parents around the world can agree that for those of you who have ever had to load a sleeping child into a car and you've got soft closed doors, it's a real lifesaver. Alright, so now we are actually on the way to lunch, and we're gonna give the RX350h a little bit of a test drive, you know, run it on some town roads and highway as well. They're asking me to stop. Okay, some roads here. Yes, so to start things off, one of the key things that you'll need to know about the RX350h, the new one, is that it runs on a completely different platform from its previous generations. And this is a big deal for Lexus, because the previous platform had been running on or for 3 generations of Lexus RXs. So for those of you who don't know, there are actually 5 generations of the Lexus RX, all the way back from 1998. So the one from 1998, the very first generation, that was a completely different platform. From the 2nd to the 4th generation RX, they were actually running on one platform, the same platform. And then now in the 5th generation, and if you think about it, it's kind of like a 25-year anniversary, right? Because now it's 2023. So it's like exactly 25 years of Lexus RX. And this Lexus RX runs on a different platform. So what that means is that the car does not drive the same as it did with its predecessors. I know a lot of you think that, especially with Toyota and Lexus cars, right? A lot of times they use the same platforms, and then they, you know, they just sort of give it a facelift, and then it's called a new model, but actually the cars underneath are pretty much identical. Not exactly true with this car. Of course, there are a lot of similarities in terms of the engine with other engine units used in the lineup. This one here uses a 2.5 litre hybrid, and it runs on an eCVT transmission. So essentially a CVT, just that it has that physical first gear that helps to kind of move the car off a little bit better. Okay. So the back to the platform, right? So generally, first impressions is that the car feels quite a lot more premium to drive than its predecessors. It feels heavier in a nice way, weighty, a little bit more continental if you may. And obviously, I drive a BMW myself, so I like the feeling when cars feel a little bit hefty on the road. You don't feel like you're driving a giant tin can, right? And I think that's what you get with the new Lexus RX. You've got a very nice, heavy, weighty feel to the car, and the car feels extremely composed in that sense. And with all Lexus cars in general, I think they've always been known to be extremely comfortable, and that is no different in this particular car. It is important though to kind of understand that there are two types of comfort, right? So some automakers set up their cars to be a little bit more firm, and it is comfortable in that sense. It's firm but comfortable, not crashy of course, but firm. Holds through the corners, doesn't really bounce around. When you go through undulations and humps on the road, like the whole suspension setup is pretty tight. With the Lexus, however, it is comfortable in a completely different way. It is comfortable in the soft and airy kind of way. So not exactly the firm ride that you would expect from a Conti car. It's more pliant, it's more floaty in a sense, but the downside of it all is that it does get a bit bouncy when you go over bumpier roads or roads with some humps or some undulations. It does get a little bit bouncy, it gets a bit wafty, and hey, that is actually, whether that is a good or bad thing, I think that is completely subjective, because some people who have spent their entire lives driving cars that are like that, they are used to this sort of suspension setup, and that's nice for them. On the flip side then, those people who have been driving Continental cars most of their life and are used to the more planted, more taut, more tight kind of suspension setup, then I think this might get a little bit of getting used to. But all in all, while we're on the topic of Conti versus Japanese premium cars, I think the Lexus RX350h is probably as close to a Continental drive as it has ever been in its entire history. So for those people who have been driving Continental cars and say like, hey, do I want to try out a Japanese car? Do I want to try out a Lexus? Do I want to finally make the shift towards reliability? Well, this might actually be a good time to try it out, because I think it's as close as it has ever been. Very, very minor differences in terms of the way the cars feel. How there is a difference though is of course largely due or largely down to the transmission of choice in the Lexus RX. So generally speaking, if you look at the entire lineup, in Singapore specifically, the Lexus RX is only offered as a hybrid. There are no more petrol-only variants of the Lexus RX that are being brought into Singapore. And I think that's also largely due to the fact that Singaporeans are extremely conscious about fuel economy. And just last year, we had that massive petrol price hike, which saw petrol prices reach, I think it was what, $3.50 per litre for just a regular 5,000 or RON 95 or 95 octane petrol, whichever country you're from. You guys call it like differently. So that was actually really pricey, and I think a lot of Singaporeans are just very, very conscious about fuel economy. And if you look at the body model setup right now, I think a lot of the cars that they are retailing are also of the hybrid variant. They no longer do the regular ones, right? Specific to Lexus, on the hybrid variants, you can only get the eCVT transmission. And I know what a lot of you guys are thinking, like, CVT, droney, but guess what? It's fuel efficient, it's ultra smooth, and it gets the job done. So this is not a performance car, right? And I don't think anybody buys a Lexus RX because they want to chuck their vehicles around corners or go to 99 bends or whatever have you. I think they buy it because they want a premium, reliable, smooth, comfortable, quiet SUV that is practical, large, has quite a bit of that premium factor, you know, that status, and they want the car to be fuss free. They want that fuss free ownership experience, and it is exactly what you get with the Lexus RX. Because honestly, when you're just driving around from day to day, and Singapore expressway speeds, you know, I would say that you typically travel between what, 70 to 90 kilometers per hour. This is an extremely comfortable car to cruise around with. And as far as CVTs go, I think the transmission fits the purpose. Obviously, it's not a particularly driver-oriented car. It's not extremely rewarding when you put your foot down and you try to get the car to rev up, because honestly, there's definitely going to be a little bit of a droning sound. But there are a few key points about the Lexus RX that make this quite bearable. So first and foremost, insulation is top-notch. On the road, when you rev it up, I mean, you still can hear a bit of engine noise, but it's actually quite minimal. So the drone that you get is at a very minimal. And if you're listening to your favorite song on Spotify at a considerable volume, I think you're not really going to hear it. And in that sense, I think it's quite negligible. Second of all, the eCVT with its physical first gear does help to remove some of the drone, especially when you're moving off the line. So if you're accelerating in a spirited fashion off the line, you know, from the traffic light, trying to beat the Grab driver beside you, it doesn't feel that bad. So, talking about insulation on the road, I think that kind of brings us to our next point, which is that now that the RX350 is a 5-seater only, no longer a 7-seater, there's no option for a 7-seater. And I think a lot of people will be asking, right, why not just buy a Lexus NX because it's cheaper, it looks just as good, maybe even better because it's, you know, a smaller package, a bit neater. Why not just buy a Lexus NX and save all that money? But here is where I think there is a real difference, because in the Lexus NX, when I test drove it earlier this year, I remember that the CVT drone was still quite prominent. And I think, you know what, the transmissions are the same, right? And the drivetrains are almost similar. So I'm not going to put it down to the engine or the transmission, but I think the difference here was probably the insulation of the car. So in the Lexus RX, I think the insulation is just that much better, and there's a clear step up here from the Lexus NX if you're looking at overall driving comfort, conduciveness of the cabin. I think this is where there is a difference, and this is what you'll probably be paying for if you're considering a Lexus RX. Of course, the car is bigger, you know, you've got a bit more space, quite a lot more space actually, but 5 seats is 5 seats lah. And you know, in Singapore we're not giants, we're not like 190 meters tall or something. I mean, most of us are probably within the 170 to 180 centimeters kind of height range. So I think that's probably more than enough, or rather even the NX is probably more than enough for most Asians. But if you want the extra space, you want the extra leg room, especially in the rear, you want your passengers to be a bit more comfortable, you want a quieter cabin, better insulation, then I think the RX is probably gives you a clear step up from Lexus NX. So in this class of car, and I want to kind of talk about what other cars you can buy in the segment, right? But things are kind of getting more ambiguous now, because, you know, there are a lot of sub-models that kind of fit in between the standard models. For example, you know, last time you've got like last time you've got X3, X5 from the BMW, but now you also have an X4. And of course, it's very clear which platform the X4 runs on, but generally there's still a bit of a ambiguity when it comes to which price segment it sits in. So I can't remember the price of the Lexus RX350 offhand, and honestly there's no point remembering the price as well, because with the current COE trend, prices are going to change every 2 weeks, and they have been changing every 2 weeks. So by the time you watch this video, whatever I've said in terms of price is probably not going to be relevant anymore. But hold on, let me just get through traffic here. There we go. Nice power there. Okay. So yes, sorry. So the Lexus RX350 sits somewhere around the $400,000 mark, or mid 400,000s, and I would say that its main competitors are probably cars like the BMW X5, your Audi Q5, and your Mercedes-Benz GLC, which are all very good cars in their respective ways. But interestingly, I think the Lexus RX is probably the most unique of them all, just because it's the only Japanese one that sits in that premium segment, and it is also the only one that runs a CVT. So going back to the point about CVT, I know that a lot of people don't associate CVT transmissions with luxury cars, because a luxury car is supposed to have a torque converter, right? Or at least a dual clutch transmission. But the truth is, what you want from a luxury car is peace and quiet, ease of driving on the road, something that's, with a better perceived sense of reliability. And with that, I think the Lexus RX does make a very strong case for itself. Lexus cars have been known to be one of the most reliable in the world, and I think all around the world, if you look at those reliability indexes, right, Lexus cars typically tend to do very well, and they tend to sit very high atop those rankings. So if you're the sort of consumer or owner who isn't a car freak, isn't a car nerd, you're not concerned about how many horsepower you have, you're not concerned about torque figures, you aren't concerned about how your car downshifts when you accelerate so that you can get past the car in front of you, then the Lexus RX is probably one of the options that you should really consider, because I think it's just that much more of a fuss-free ownership experience. I'm cruising down now at about 90 kilometers per hour on the expressway, and it's easy as hell. It's just so relaxing. It's a very, very undaunting experience. And I can imagine myself driving this car through peak hour traffic, listening to my favorite tracks, and not really being too bothered about what goes on around me. So yeah, I think that kind of sums up the experience of driving a Lexus RX. And if you're unsure about whether or not this Lexus RX is going to feel any different from the previous generations of Lexus RX, then just go and try it, because I think only when you try it, then you get the full idea of what I mean when I say that the platform is different and the drive is different and the car feels different. If you have any questions about the Lexus RX, please drop them in the comments. I will try to answer them as best as possible. And if I don't know the answer, I will go and ask my friends over at Lexus so that we can get you an answer. If you have enjoyed the video, or if you have found this video particularly useful, then please subscribe to the channel, give this a like, share with your friends or something, maybe share with your uncle or your dad, somebody who's considering buying a Lexus RX. And yeah, so If not, then please take care of yourself, be safe, and we will see you next time.